Going for two, kickers are extra, I give them the boot. Ooh, going for two, sit back, relax while I grab me a brew. Ooh, now I'm reclining while putting my time and I'm ready to go. My spine is aligning and much my lineups, my bank account grow. I am so rich, but knowledge is all that I'm leaving it with. Ooh, listen to this, multiple options, how far can I get? Ooh, DFS Dynasty redraft tonight, I'm not finishing last. I'm finishing past any and all, I am looking to last. What else? This spot is popping and I am so locked in and only opening the door when it is opportunity knocking. And all of these spots keep on talking and talking. So what are we talking? What kind of alignment? And running it deep, even players forgotten or came from the bottom or hitting that top end. And this spot is popping, yeah, this spot is popping. And woo! This is the armchair, yeah. Put up your arms, yeah. Sound the alarm, yeah, yeah, yeah. Woo!
What is going on, guys, and welcome to the Fifth Quarter Personal League Podcast. I am your host tonight, Jeff Lambert, and you can follow me on Twitter at JeffLambert77. I am here with the panel tonight. We have a full house tonight. First up, we got Mr. Brian Ford, who is the host of the Dynasty Saturday Night 5 right here on Going for Two Live, and also the Dynasty Fever podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at FFJunkie_. What's up, Brian?
Hey, not much and a lot. Glad to be here. Training camp's in full swing. We got a sort of preseason game I heard the other day, and we've got another Blue Room League with the 19th hole or fifth quarter or whatever we're calling this one. Really looking forward to another show.
Good stuff. Also joining us tonight, Mr. Shane Barrett. He is the host of the Polly's Playoff Tournament and podcast and contributor for RotoHeat.com. Follow him at FFShaneB. And Shane, I got it right again, man. I had to read it. I have to read it. That's the only way I can do it without saying Polly's Pocket, but I got it right.
Bro, that's 2 in a row. You're starting a streak. I am so proud of you. Speaking of Polly's Playoff, it starts tomorrow. So if I seem a little less energetic tonight, that's probably why, because I'm balls to the wall and trying to get everything set up. But I couldn't say no to a PLP, especially when some other stuff canceled. So I'm here. Let's have some fun.
Love it. Love it. Also joining us tonight for his first appearance on a PLP, Mr. Jamie Perogue, host of the Fantasy Cheat Sheet podcast right here on Going for Two Live every Tuesday night. You can follow him on Twitter at Jamie Perogue. What's up, Jamie?
Man, it's good to be on the screen this time. I'm always in the chat listening to you guys, giving my advice. Now I can actually talk and tell you guys about it.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Love to have you on, and it's great that you're going to be sort of popping your cherry tonight on the PLP. Love it. Love it. All right, so for those out there that are wondering what the hell is a PLP, I'm tuning into this show, and I don't even know what a PLP is. Essentially, for the next hour to hour and a half, we are going to be breaking down this Dynasty League, the Fifth Quarter podcast. We're going to be breaking them down team by team. I gave these gentlemen the rosters for all of these 10 teams, and they ranked them from 1 to 10, with 1 being the team they'd most want to take over as an orphan, and 10 being the team they would least want to take over as an orphan. And then we created a conglomerate ranking out of those, which we'll count down tonight. And then I assigned each one of them a couple teams each that they're going to be the quote-unquote expert of. So when we get to that team in the ranking, they will break them down, strengths, weaknesses, trade advice, what they would do to improve the team, et cetera, et cetera. With that said, let's go ahead and just jump right into team number 10.
Number 10.
Number 10 team ranked as high as 9 and as low as 10. And I said this pre-show, and I'm going to say it again. I know that it's supposed to be Dylan M.A., but when I look at that name, I just want to say Dylon. That's all I want to say. So we're going to call this team Dylon. And it is team number 10. Brian, this is your squad.
I was like, is this Dylan Ma? What is so I had this team also ranked 10th. Just a couple disclaimers. So as we said, this is about would we rather take it over as an orphan, not necessarily like who's going to win. I think another thing to think about is, especially in these 10-team leagues that we've been doing with Godstrike and our friends, you know, we see that a lot of patches in the league are kind of flat, like outside of like maybe like the top 2 or bottom 2 teams. I thought that was especially true in this league. Almost like, I'm not saying 1 to 10 was flat, but if we looked at the flatness of 1 to 10, it would be flatter 1 to 10 than any Godstrike league that we've done. And so it's really sometimes a matter of flavor and how you like to build and that sort of thing. And to be honest, some of the things that I, like might critique or say a team can improve on, I've got teams that are like that too. Like it's the nature of the beast when you have, a lot of dynasty leagues. But, so I think for a 10-team league, I'd like to see the quarterbacks be a little better. We've got JJ McCarthy, a rookie who looks like more and more like he's going to sit a lot this season. Deshaun Watson, who, I think his performance last year is underrated when you look at fantasy finishes, and does, I think, look to be a bounce back player this year, but he's not, a stud or anything. And then we've got Russell Wilson, kind of, the same thing, not a stud. And then Mac Jones, who I think might find a starting job at some point in the next year or two. But those would not be the 4 quarterbacks I would want to have if I was taking over an orphan. So we've got some weaknesses there. This is a potential start 6 wide receiver league if you look at the flexes. It's also a potential start 4 running backs if you look at the flexes. I still like to have, though, a running back to wide receiver ratio that's more like 6-4 or more running backs to wide receivers on the roster, right? Because the running backs get injured more. You get your top stud wide receivers to really lock in those points and get that ceiling too, on a few of them. And then you have that stable of running backs because you got to build for chaos. And I think a lot of these teams are building it, I think, the wrong way. And I think are leaning into that idea that you can start 6. So I'd like to see that ratio be different. And I think like after, the first, couple, like maybe Gibbs, and if you think, Zamir is going to be a thing this year, then we've really only got Singletary, Bucky Irving, and Pierce, which are fine. But if you're going to be that fragile with like whatever 5 running backs in your roster, they need to be a better 5 running backs than that. I think also after your first 2 to 3 wide receivers, if you're looking at, say, Marvin Harrison, Tank Dell, and George Pickens, whom I'm lower on than most people, we're also looking at some kind of meh, stock, including, roster cloggers like David Bell and Alec Pierce, some other, wide receivers that are, generally mid here. Cedric Tillman, the player was in college was really good, but he's yet to kind of break in and have a role. It's kind of same thing with Brendan Rice. We don't know what the role is going to be, although there is some room there on that bad depth chart. Lockett is aging, and he's going to be the wide receiver 3 on Seattle this year. Kendrick Bourne coming back from an injury. Josh Palmer, he's going to be fine. He's going to start. He'll get you whatever, 10, 12, 13 points, most weeks. But again, it's just very lackluster after the top 2 or 3, especially when you keep in mind that, like, Marvin Harrison Jr. is, in fact, a rookie. George Pickens is, in fact, volatile and can't separate. That's why he has so many contested catches. So, obviously, tight end McBride we love, but I would love him a lot more if this was a tight end premium. And then we have Hunter Henry and Michael Mayer. Not sure that I need 3 if there's no tight end premium, but at least there's a start tight end spot, unlike a lot of these leagues that we've been doing. So really, in the end, it's 10th simply because, like, if you're going to be kind of this ugly a team, then I would have expected to see more draft picks in the cupboard. So you can't compete, but like you don't really have, a really young upside. I mean, you can't compete, but like I don't think you're as good as some of the true contenders. And you don't have a whole lot of young upside, and you don't have a whole lot of draft capital. So it's kind of like, what are we doing here? And so I would just, look to make any deals that you think will add value overall to your roster, right? And that's buying power, that's trading power. So, and then see where you are there. And it may be a year where you're going to have to swallow it and compete in 2025, or after you move some pieces around, you might find that, you maybe have a shot at the playoffs.
Yeah, great breakdown, and I agree with all the points that you said there. And one thing that you're talking about not competing, and what you can do to improve this team. And I think really the big glaring thing here is I think you are at least a year away from competing, if not 2. I think I'm trying to move one of those running backs, whether it be Zamir White or Jahmyr Gibbs. I like to, whenever I'm in even if it's not a full on rebuild, if I'm just trying to like build my value, I want more receivers. I don't want the high end running back on a team that's not going to be competing. So I would move that high end Jameer Gibbs, get a tiered down running back. Cause like, Brian mentioned, you don't want to just, punt running back altogether, but then get another young receiver, maybe get a draft pick out of it, something like that. That's kind of how I see myself. If I was to try to improve this team, I see Jameer Gibbs being a guy that by the time this team is ready to fully compete, might not be the running back that he is right now with the value that he has. Is that kind of how you feel right there, Brian?
Yeah, and Zamir, I think, is another good guy to move. He's really just projectable volume. He's nothing really exciting. There are some believers, and there is some upside, but again, you're looking at the fact that it's a running back, and if you're unlikely to compete, which I think is true, you don't really want a whole lot of points on your roster. You kind of want to get those points off for now, right, and then turn those points into Bitcoin in your draft capital, right? And then move that money for buying things later. So yeah, I think you've got two good trade candidates there, including the two you mentioned, as well as Singletary. I think an unimpressive tight end like Dalton Schultz might be useful to somebody who, especially if there's an injury or something at tight end. There's a player who has Hawk on their team, and they're going to need a tight end for the first 9 weeks or so, not named Taysom Hill. So, I would deal Lockett. Definitely, move off some of those veterans.
Jamie, anything that you want to add to this team?
No, I was just going to bring up Singletary, but you guys hit on that. The Lockett thing was the other one. Also, maybe try to just get rid of Jalen Hyatt for anything. I think he's just going to be a roster clogger. But
At this point, you can get a third for Jalen Hyatt. I think you go out and do that, right? I mean, he still has the potential. He's a year 2 receiver. He could break out. I don't see it happening, but can you get a 3rd round pick for him? Maybe.
With this team being like 2 years out, I might want to keep Gibbs just because he is at high end, and just maybe get rid of White and Singletary.
Fair enough.
You get
Shane, anything you wanted to add real quick before we get to the next team?
I would wait for Josh Palmer to have a really good game and then probably sell him.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, let's go ahead and get to team number 9.
Number 9.
Number 9 team ranked as high as 7 and as low as 10, so a pretty good disparity here in a 10-team league. It is Depth Depot, and Jamie, this is your squad. Give us your breakdown.
When I saw his team name Depth Depot, I guess he sold all his depth because there is none. The only good piece on this team that I would say is going to be Kyler Murray. After that, you got Drake May, who's going to take about a couple years. Aiden O'Connell, Daniel Jones. I would try to see what you get for them now, since they're kind of getting like Jones has a starting job. O'Connell possibly could get the starting job. You have no really good receivers. I know Jeff's a big Keon Coleman guy, but he's your number 2. That's
not that big of a fan.
I like Coleman as like a number 4, but he's your number 2. JSN, I love JSN. Don't get me wrong, but as your number 1, that's very scary. So the way I like to build teams is I like to get the young high-end receivers first. I punt running backs. So what you have in Trey Benson, I would see what you get for Trey Benson. See if you get like a higher end wide receiver on your team. You have no tight ends at all. No starting tight ends. Like Tucker Kraft, he's not even the number 1 on his team. Bellinger's going to be competing with Theo Johnson, and Kate Otton's like ranked down closer to the 20th tight end in my ranks. So not much there. I see you tried to get like the Treylon Burks. Burks a few years ago was a high-end player, so you probably missed out on that, taking him in the first round. That hurt this team a lot. There's really no running backs on the bench that I'm in love with. Dylan Lobb. I'm a huge fan of Dylan Lobb, but he could be nothing. Like, I'm getting him in like the late 4th, early 5th rounds in rookie drafts. So what I would do is I would just hold off on running backs with this team, try to work on the receivers. I mean, you got some good wide receiver 4s on this team, like Roman Wilson. He's my most owned dynasty player, but he's my 6th, 7th receiver on the team. He's not my 3rd, 4th guy. Josh Downs, I like him. He's also going to be like that flex guy. You can't rely on him every week to week. You do got a bunch of capital. I see you're going to have the 101, obviously. So I'm thinking Carson Beck could be one of your targets next year. So you got that high-end quarterback, the pair with the May and Murray. But other than that, I mean, I see you have 2 other first. I don't know, who knows where those are going to be. Maybe you could try to sell those first and get actual receivers that can help this team. But yeah, other than that, I'm not really. This is my 10th ranked team in this league, and I would rank it lower if I could.
Yeah, so I had this team ranked at 9, and I would have had him at 10 because I don't think there's as many players that are as valuable as the last team we just talked about. But you just mentioned that draft capital. He's got 6 firsts over the next 2 seasons. So that's going to be fun to play with, right? We talk about this a lot on the PLPs, that having that draft capital is almost like having money in these kind of leagues. You could buy, you could move things around at any given time. You can hold them until the draft season comes up and they're worth the most you can possibly get for them. So you trade them at that point. Or you could just hold pat and just draft the guys that that come to you in the draft. But it gives you a lot of flexibility, which is why I had this team at 9. The overall starting roster, I think, is worse than the last roster we just talked about, because there's not anybody in the starting lineup that I feel 100% comfortable with as a starter, other than maybe Kyler Murray. Like, you got Trey Benson. There's been reports coming out of camp that he's not even getting the second string snaps right now. He's getting third string. So that could be just some rookie stuff that maybe eventually he gets worked in behind James Conner. But best case scenario, he starts the season behind James Conner. Jalen Warren, I don't want him to be my RB1 or RB2. Jackson Smith-Njigba, Josh Downs, Keon Coleman. These are all guys that are in your starting lineup that I don't feel comfortable with starting. It's that draft capital that really is kind of holding you afloat right now, and what you do with it over the next 2 years is going to be, really telling as to what you can do with this team. But you've got plenty of draft capital, and at this point, I don't think there's anything you can do with that draft capital that's going to make you a contender or even a playoff team this season. So I'm just going to be riding it out, right? I'm just going to be holding it. If I can get any value for any of these guys that that aren't the younger guys that you can potentially move. Maybe move them for more draft picks, more draft capital, and just go into a full-on rebuild mode. Brian, I'm curious to your thoughts, because I know you're kind of like me with the draft capital. You like to have lots of draft capital, and this team, I think, has over the next 2 seasons probably the most of draft capital with the 6 firsts over the next 2 years. What are your thoughts on this team?
Yeah, so I mean, I have similar-ish thoughts on the roster to y'all too, although higher on some of these players. But it's those 6 firsts. It's like, okay, well, I may not have much here, but I have $600 bills, right, to use. I think I love Jalen Warren. I think he's my 16th overall dynasty running back. Running backs are going to get used a lot in Arthur Smith, and he's more explosive than Najee. But again, it's that kind of thing where, like, okay, wait for him to produce and then move him. Downs, I think, is far underrated. I think people think he's going to be buried as the wide receiver 3 there, and I disagree. Sharp has.
Can I chime in on Josh Downs?
Sure, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
If you go look at Josh Downs and Jaden Reed's stat lines, they're extremely similar. And people are hyping up Jaden Reed like he's the next coming of Deebo Samuel. And they're not talking about Josh Downs.
And so Jaden Reed has better guys to contend with on his team.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think, you're looking at Charb, who has standalone value and an offense that's going to pass more. JSN, listen, people who are out on JSN this year are going to really regret it. So I think I have better thoughts on some of the individual pieces, and then you add in, those six firsts, and that's where I'm at with the ranking them seventh. Again, I would encourage you not necessarily to sit on the six firsts like the whole time. If you see an opportunity to pair it with something and grab something high end, especially if, like, let's say, like, I don't know, like Brandon Ayuk or somebody goes and has a high ankle sprain and they're out for a really core 6 weeks of the season for somebody. First plus something, boom, you stash Ayuk. He's not putting points on your roster for the rest of the season, and now you have a high end wide receiver that you got for a value price next year.
Yeah, that's a very underrated strategy right there, is go out and get the guys that get hurt, that still have, long-term value, because the teams that have them, especially if they're contenders, they're going to be looking to move them to continue to contend. And that's the perfect opportunity to sort of stack that roster. And like Brian said, you're not getting points for them because they're hurt for that good part of the season. So you're helping your draft stock overall by doing that as well. So that's a really good point. All right, let's get to team number 8.
Number 8.
Number 8 team ranked as high as 7 and as low as 9, and it is Ryro. And Brian, this is your squad.
Yeah, so I think people are going to disagree with this, but when I look at the quarterbacks, Love, Purdy, Goff as your top 3, I'm like, those are solid, but I don't think any of them are studs. And maybe it might reflect that I'm a little lower on Love and Purdy than I think a lot of the dynasty community. I think Goff's kind of ceiling is capped, and he tends to be overvalued in startups. So I would want to see like a stud, in a 10-team league. Penix and Jameis Winston after are fine, but I would like to see one of those guys be a real stud. Again, I'm gonna bang the table for shifting your RB wide receiver ratio so you have too few RBs. JT and Mixon are very good as starters. Kamani Vidal and Brown, certainly have. Is that the Chase Brown team? I just have Brown here.
Chase Brown, yes.
Yeah. So they have very good upside. I think Brown, I think, is getting more buzz for 2024. Vidal has 2 aging injured guys in front of him, so definitely some upside there. But then it's like, Izzy Abanikanda, who I really like, is unfortunately probably buried and going to get cut or traded. And AJ Dillon, again, with Lloyd there, I know that there was this headline that he's supposed to be the number 2, but this is why we lean into guys like Lloyd over Dillon, because a few weeks into the season, that's probably going to be a different story. So these guys, in some sense, end up roster cloggers. So now you're saying, okay, I have too few running backs. 2 of them are roster clogger-ish. 2 of them are young question mark-ish. And 2 of them are already second contract 25 and above. It's like, all right, well then, I don't know that that's something that I would want to inherit as an orphan. Solid wide receivers, and again, too many. I love Waddle. I'm a big Waddle guy. We've got Pittman, Jaden Reed. I agree with Shane is probably a little overhyped. Godwin, I think, could have a solid bounce back year and become a very tradable piece soon, and his value will increase. There's a lot of talk of moving him back into the slot where he's thrived more. Keep an eye out for that. Dontavian Wicks, I think, is the Green Bay wide receiver you want at cost relative to the others. And I would not be surprised if he has a better year than Reed. Dobbs, I think, again, it would take an injury for him to, I think, be really good in 2024. I think he's just that guy that Matt Harmon calls the sacrificial X wide receiver. You just kind of go out there on the backside, run your routes to pull people off in the defense and kind of, do your thing. But like the explosive upside isn't there. Troy Franklin, bad buzz in camp, even though I do think there's upside there. Tyler Boyd, Dusty, Chark, if he wasn't on the Chargers, right? Like, I don't know, would he even be like, the wide receiver 3 on a team? A lot of good talk about Dortch, but, he's got his limitations. Tutu and Cowing in a 10-team league like this are probably cuttable, and roster clogging. So, I think a mixed bag there at wide receiver. Njoku's good. Being that this is a league that does start tight ends, I would maybe want to see a second one or a backup if I was inheriting this team. Pretty good draft capital. You've got that extra second and that extra fourth. I think this is a solid team, but I think it needs some retooling to kind of sustain the success. There's nothing really that kind of stands out to me that's like, when I would open it up on Sleeper and it's an orphan, I'm like, oh yeah, I want to take that over, because I'll be like, I probably want to trade JT and Mixon, and I don't know, are people going to want God? Like, it's just one, and too few running backs, and that's so what I would do if I were you, I would shift that running back to wide receiver ratio. But the wide receivers that you have that are more expendable are not attractive for trading, I think. So that's tough, right? Guys like Boyd and Chark and Dortch and Dubs, and those are some of the guys that are meh on your team relative to the other guys. But that also means they're not going to get much in trading. And maybe another option is that you say, I'm going to try for a stud quarterback first and go from there. Again, I had them ranked 9, but it's one of those things where it's like, it's not a bad team, but when I would open it up on Sleeper, I'd be like, okay, I got some work to do, because it's just not the way that I like to build.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of those points you made there. And one thing I wanted to point out too is I kind of like, I guess it's sort of bittersweet in a way. I like it and I don't like it. So he's got Jordan Love as his quarterback, and then he's got 3 of the top receivers for Green Bay.
Yeah.
I'm assuming he's hoping that one of them comes out to be on top. He better hope it's not Christian Watson. That's the one he doesn't own. But then
I was assuming he's a Packers fan.
Yeah, it's very possible he's a Packers fan. My only problem with that is once that is established, let's just say it's Jaden Reed is the number 1, then the other 2 guys you have on your squad now have less value to the rest of the league. So having those 3 guys is great. If one of them does step up and become the number 1 receiver, you got a nice little stack there, but then it lowers the value of the other 2 guys. And I don't know if that offense is going to be that good where you're going to be able to start 2 of them comfortably. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Jordan Love is going to light it up, but I just don't see it, at least not this season. But overall, you're right. I mean, the quarterbacks, say what you will about Jordan Love. I think there's a potential of him being a stud eventually, but it's not there yet. Brock Purdy, again, sort of the trifecta of quote unquote boring quarterbacks, right? Nobody wants Goff, nobody wants Purdy. No one really wants Love either, but the 3 of them together kind of create a solid quarterback room, but not elite. But looking at this roster, in a 10-team league, you can get, teams like this where the starting roster is not bad, right? I mean, Jordan Love, you got Jonathan Taylor, Joe Mixon is supposed to be pretty good, Jalen Waddle, Michael Pittman had an awesome season last year. You can definitely see a route where this team is a playoff team, and if things break right, it could even be a contender. We still have ranked at number 8, but I mean, I think that, in a 10-team league, like you mentioned, Brian, it's a very flat across the board. A few things break right, you make a trade here or there, and all of a sudden you're a contending team. So solid team overall. Jamie, I wanted to ask you, because you had this team ranked the highest of all of us. You had them at 7, so not too terribly higher than what they're ranked as. But what do you like about this team?
I just liked having Waddle and Pittman together. You got like the 2 top 15-ish guys. I mean, Waddle could be a top 12 easy whenever Hill retires. He's going to be a top 10 stud, I believe. But yeah, it's just the starting lineup. That's what caught my attention. And I just want to bring up one point is you have Jameis Winston on this team. If you're going to shoot for upside like Brock Purdy, let's say Brock Purdy gets hurt. Joshua Dobbs, last year he actually had like top 5 games, I believe. And that was on Washington. Now that he's on a better San Francisco team, I mean, he could be a solid upside quarterback. So if you want upside, get rid of Winston, maybe pick up Dobbs just in case.
Yeah, that's a good call. Yeah, that's something that we don't really think about, handcuffing quarterbacks, but there's really no reason you couldn't go out and do that, because you're right. If Purdy was to get hurt, God forbid, as a 49ers fan, I don't want to hear that, but he could definitely be viable. I don't know if he's a free agent in this league or not, but someone you can definitely pick up and add to your roster just to have him there.
Yeah, but I mean, what I really like about his team is he already has like 4 starting top 20 quarterbacks.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely got some guys up there that are pretty good. So, yeah, for sure. Shane, anything you wanted to add here? Nope, nothing really. Okay, we'll move on to team number 7.
Number 7.
Number 7 team ranked as high as 7, as low as 8, and it is Talk of the Town. And Jamie, this is your squad.
Let's see. Let me pull it up. Talk of the Town. Is it on there a different name? Because I'm not seeing Talk of the Town.
The Talk of the Town is the team name. I don't know what the sleeper name is.
Chubb. Oh, it used to be, I think, the 2 girls, 1 Chubb, but is it Kirk's Chubb or something like that now?
It is 2 girls, 1
Dylan
Chubb. I
Hurst.
think is the name of the sleeper name. I think. Let me get it pulled up on screen here. So Lamar Jackson, got Cook, Rashad White, Devonta Smith, Keenan Allen, Roma Dunze, Evan Ingram, and Aaron Jones.
I got it. All right. Yeah. I think this is like one of the bottom halves to compete this year, but it's got some good pieces. It's pretty much the opposite of how I like to build teams. You got a bunch of running backs, but you're really weak at receivers. I'd rather be really strong at receiver and weak at running back. But you do have a solid Lamar. You got Tua, who's solid, just got the payday. And then Baker Mayfield. I mean, he could be a top 20 guy. So he could be someone's super flex in this league, and he's on your bench. So I do like that. There's no draft capital, which really concerns me with this team. What I would try to do maybe is try to sell some of these running backs, because like if you're on the bottom half to compete, you're going to have a lot of these running backs die on your roster. There's not like they're spring chickens. You got Aaron Jones. Right now he's getting hype with the new team. He's going to be the number 1. He's never had over 50 to 60% of snaps in his career. He hasn't been a top tier running back since 2020. So I would try to look to get rid of him, get some draft capital under your belt. James Conner, same thing. He's not even in your starting lineup. He's on your bench. So he's going to die on your team if you don't trade him. I would try to look to get rid of him. Jameis Winston as your 3rd wide receiver on this team, because, I mean, you have Odunze and Allen. That worries me a lot. I don't mind having 2 of the same receivers on a team, but I don't want it to be Keenan Allen and Odunze. I would try to get rid of Keenan Allen, see what you can get for Allen. And let's see what else you got. I mean, it's a good base to build off of with the Lamar, Tua, Baker, and then D. Smith and Odunze. I would just look to flip those running backs, try to get receivers for them. You could probably get a first for Barkley right now. I believe you could probably get like a sell Connor and Jones to a contender. So you'll get like a late second for each of those guys. Zeke, right now he's the number 1 on that team. I sold Zeke recently for like a mid to late 3rd. I forgot which one it was, just to get him off my team. And that was before the trade. So I'm pretty sure you might be able to get even an early 3rd for him right now. And let's see, Fields, I don't know how you guys feel about him. It's like a lottery ticket to me. He could be a top 5 dynasty asset if it works out for him, or it could be nothing. So I think his price right now is like a 2nd rounder, early to Ted team. It would probably be a mid-second. You could probably get for Fields. And let's see. That's pretty much it. Brandon Cooks. I would look to get rid of Brandon Cooks. He's going to die on your roster if you don't get rid of him. Even upgraded tight end, Ingram, because by the time I see this team competing, Ingram's probably going to be like 31 years old, because he's already, 29 right now?
Yeah, he's up there.
Yeah, he's up there. So people look at him as a top 5, top 6 tight end right now. 2 years from now, he could be outside the top 12, and that's not going to help you when you're trying to compete. So see if you can get some of that draft capital back that you sold off. I don't even see what he got for this draft capital. I'm thinking he might have sold to buy all these running backs? Like, what do you guys think?
Yeah, so I'm looking at it. I mean, it's really hard to say what he sold it for, but you're right. I mean, like Saquon Barkley, if he didn't already have him on his team, he probably had to pay, some of that draft capital to get him. Roma Dunze, did he trade away to get to move up to get Roma Dunze in the draft? Overall, this team has some holes, right? Like the last roster we looked at, I felt didn't have any glaring holes in the starting lineup, whereas I feel this one does. Like you mentioned, Keenan Allen, Roma Dunze. Obviously, I don't mind having either one of those guys or even having both of those guys. But if I'm having to start both of those guys, that could be an issue. Jamison Williams currently listed as a starter as well. I don't know if I want to have him as my starter. So it's a little bit tough in that sense. Shane, we haven't heard from you in a while, and this is the Baker Mayfield team. So I wanted to get you to chime in here. I think Shane might be muted.
Oh yeah,
There we go. I got you.
testing 1, 2, 3.
You're good.
Cool. Yeah, I had this team ranked 7th. I think the starting lineup is solid, but then looking at it, kind of like you guys were saying, there's not that true wide receiver 1. You've got Devontae Smith, who's going to be a wide receiver 2. Roma Dunze, who's probably a wide receiver 3 on his team this year. Keenan Allen, while getting up there, he's always open. He has the potential to get there, but DJ Moore is still in town. So, like, there's a lot of competition for targets there in Chicago. I like your running backs, Barkley, Rashad White, and James Cook, and then Aaron Jones as well. And obviously, with Baker, Lamar, and Tua, you've probably got, if I'm looking at it right, I would say probably the 3rd best quarterback room in the league. Because Lamar can be that QB1. Tua has his QB1 weeks. Baker even has his QB1 weeks. So, like, you've got a solid QB room. I just think there's, like the other guys mentioned, some lack of upside, I think is how I would categorize it. So, like, sell James Conner, like Jamie mentioned, sell Alexander Madison, Brandon Cooks. If you can find anything for Jerry Jeudy, Cole Kmet, those are some of the guys that I would look to move probably.
Yeah, and I think the biggest knock for me too is just the draft capital, right? No, I think a 4th round pick next year, and that's pretty much it. Then they have their 26th first, and then a 3rd, and a 4th, and just not enough draft capital for a team that I don't know if they're ready to compete yet. I know NBA Rigged in the chat is saying this is a win now team because of the stacked running back room. I don't know if it is though. I think when we get to some of these teams that we're going to be talking about here in a little bit, we'll see a big difference as far as a win now team or not. A couple pieces moved here and there. Maybe they can be a win now team, but I don't know if they're win now right now. Brian, real quick, what are your thoughts on this team?
Yeah, looking at it, maybe I might have switched. I have this one 8 and the other one 9. I maybe might have switched them. I think probably what I was looking at is saying, okay, I hate that there's no draft capital, but I could either tweak some things and make this team compete, or if things really broke right, make it compete and add some value with the trades. And the most tradable pieces are the ones that I don't want to have anyway, which are the old running backs.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, let's get to team number 6. Number 6 team ranked as high as 5 and as low as 6, and there's a definite jump in our rankings. I think from these teams going up. Like the last team, the overall ranking was 7.5. This one is 5.75. So this is the biggest jump from one spot to the next. And I think we kind of get into more of what we think are going to be the playoff teams and maybe even the contenders at this point forward. Team number 6 is reclaiming the crown, Brian, and this is your squad.
Yeah, so I think judging from the name and the roster, I would bet that this team was a champ or a finalist. But it's starting to reach that point where we need to make some moves to sustain things. And overall, we have age concerns on this roster. And, of course, those two go together. The quarterbacks behind Dak aren't great overall. We got Geno, Carr, and Minshew. Again, especially in a 10-team league, I'd like to see that have a little better quarterback room there. The top few running backs are pretty good. A-Chain, obviously, we know about the ceiling and upside there. I happen to be a huge Spears guy. I've got him ranked at 11th in dynasty running backs in a tier of I know. It's just, I mean, like, if I'm not honest, do we really get the wisdom of the crowds? I don't know, right? So I've got him. It's in a tier of 10 to 13, but yeah, I've got him ranked 11. He's in for, I think, a huge year, especially if D-Hop is going to miss a couple games early in the season. And then you have his teammate Pollard, which is another, pretty good running back, and Brian Robinson, who I think is an underrated running back. After those, though, we're looking at very mixed. I'm a huge Blake Watson fan, but the more and more we don't hear anything about him, and the more and more we do hear Sean Payton talking up Jaleel McLaughlin, I'm a little worried. He might become a practice squad guy, at least for this year. Tyrone Tracy, very good upside there, especially relative to cost. It is a bad offense, though. We'll see. Eckler and Gibson. Listen, I would love to see Eckler have at least somewhat of a bounce back season this year, but you're looking at two pretty ancillary, dusty-ish guys that are one is on a bad offense, Gibson, and the other, who knows how many checkdowns we're getting with a running quarterback. So, very mixed as far as the running back room goes after the top few. We're looking at some very solid wide receivers, but the problem is there's age concerns after Puka. Like Debo, Devontae, Kupp, Amari Cooper, and Ridley are all 29 plus, right? Now, I'm not saying that I never want old dudes on my team, but it's a matter of how much risk am I carrying by having that many at one position? And that's something that I want to consider, especially when after that, we're only looking at Javon Baker, who has upside, but is a rookie on a bad offense. Luke McCaffrey, kind of the same thing as far as upside, but on a bad offense. Renfro doesn't even have a job. I don't know why he's on a roster in the 10-team league. And Elijah Moore, he looks to now be the wide receiver 3 there on a team with a really good tight end. So again, and then you throw in also the running back wide receiver ratio that I've been pounding all night. Another concern for this team. You have an excellent top 2 tight ends, which kind of makes up for the fact that you might have some lack of depth at wide receiver, like Pitts and Bowers. I think they're among my top 3 dynasty tight ends. That type of thing gets me really excited when I see Pitts and Bowers on a roster. Fortunately, it's not tight end premium. You don't really need Jatavian Sanders, and I think Ferguson then becomes a trade piece for you. He's a guy who, he benefits from running a lot of routes and getting a lot of targets. There's no real, per target or per route, big upside with Ferguson. He's just kind of there. He's not much above Dalton Schultz, except that he's the second target on the team when Schultz is not. So I think he's a tradable piece to a team that needs a tight end, like the one that has Hawk right now. You have no first or second or third in 2025 and no second in 2026. So you're hitting that cliff. You need to refresh some pieces and refresh them right away. You can do both. You can compete this year and start to restock with some youth and some draft capital. But you've got to be willing to look at this team and say, I'm going to trade guys who look sort of startable or are big names, like a Ridley or like an Amari Cooper or Devontae Adams. So I would move the older wide receivers for picks and tear down pieces, including, some better running backs after the top few. So definitely a contender, and definitely some good upside pieces that I love, like HN, Spears, Pitts, and Bowers, and Puka. So it's that's kind of why I've got him in the 5 ranking. But yeah, that draft capital is nasty, and so you really need to start thinking about sustaining the success of this team.
Yeah, I agree with you there too on a lot of points you made, especially with the older receivers. Like having older receivers isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's when you have no contingency plan to replace them as they age out, right? You don't. I mean, your two receivers that you have that are going to potentially back them up are what you got McCaffrey and Javon Baker, which you mentioned aren't really the guys that you're going to be counting on to sort of move into those roles. So when those guys start to quote unquote age out, you got nothing behind them to replace them. So, I'm not opposed to keeping any of those guys, but I would look at maybe moving at least one of them to get younger, get some draft capital for them. Maybe you wait till the season starts. I always say, trade the veterans during the season when they start to have good games in a row, or when teams start to separate themselves from contenders to pretenders. Move those guys that are having that good season, those older guys, then when their value is at their highest. This team, honestly, if this is a redraft team, this team could compete and win a championship this year, and it still might even in dynasty. But you want to start thinking about ahead. How are you going to improve this roster going forward? Because once these guys fall off the cliff, your team's going to fall off the cliff, and you'd be going into a full-on rebuild. Shane, let me get your opinions on this team real quick.
Yeah. I had this team at 6, and I think the main factor was pretty easily the quarterbacks. Like, yes, you've got Dak and then Geno, but as Jeff knows, and anyone who's listened to a PLP from last year, I'm a big Sam Howell guy. And if you go look at the Commanders last year, they gave up the most sacks. So it's kind of hard to be successful when you're getting hit every other play. So I think Sam Howell may eat into some of Geno this year, especially with some of the stuff we've heard from Geno with camp, with dealing with different injuries and things like that. So I'm hopeful for Sam Howell. But then you've got Derek Carr, who I think could also be replaced by Spencer Rattler at some point this year. Gardner Minshew's in a quarterback battle with Aiden O'Connell. And then when we look at your depth, kind of like it was already mentioned, like running backs, you've got Devon Achane, Tony Pollard, and then Eckler, and then it's a bunch of question marks. And you've got Brian Robinson, so you have the Washington room locked up. Your wide receivers, as mentioned, are old. I am trying like hell to get rid of Calvin Ridley in my home league dynasty, and I can't move him. So they're getting to that point where they're almost becoming immovable. I would try your hardest to move them now or wait until they've got a bigger game that you can get rid of them. Or try and combine some of these lesser assets and increase your depth a little bit. So maybe you push all the chips in and go for it this year. And then, that draft capital is ugly. You got to recoup some of that if you can.
100%. Jamie, anything you want to chime in here real quick before we get to the next team?
Just having all these tight ends and a non-tight end premium, you could probably do something like Brian said with Ferguson. You don't need him, especially having Pitts and Bowers. Definitely try to get like one of the quarterbacks, like Deshaun Watson we talked about earlier. I mean, he's pretty low price right now. Same with Bryce Young. I would feel comfortable having Bryce Young on this team, and if just for the future, because Geno's getting up there, Carr's going to get replaced. Having either a Bryce Young or an upside guy like Watson might help this team.
Yeah, I love it.
Watson's a great pick, Jamie, and not only because he's a Brown, but he's on our 10th ranked team, right? A team that probably doesn't need or want Watson this year.
Yeah, good point. All right, let's get to team number 5.
Number 5.
Number 5 team ranked as high as 2 and as low as 6. So a pretty big disparity here. And it is KCAT 1111. Always a dispute on how we pronounce that. Is it 1111? Is it 11111? I'm going with KCAT 1111 tonight. Shane, this is your squad.
KCAT 1111 is probably sick of me because I think I've had him for the last 3 PLPs. But KCAT 1111, I have some really good news for you. This is probably the highest I've ever ranked you. I love your quarterback room. You have 2 top 10 guys in CJ Stroud and Joe Burrow. And then you follow that up with my favorite rookie, not who I think's the best, but my favorite, and Bo Nix. I think Bo landed in a perfect spot for him, and not enough people are talking about it. Then you've got Breece Hall and Isaiah Pacheco, two great dynasty running backs. I know Pacheco's not as sexy because he doesn't catch as many passes, but he's solid for a floor guy. Then you've got, I mean, we could call your wide receiver room right now Ole Miss with A.J. Brown and DK Metcalf being there. And then you've got CeeDee Lamb, who is arguably dynasty wide receiver 1. Anywhere from 1 to 3 is where I've seen him. You've got a solid tight end in Kittle, top 5-ish, at least top 10. You've got a good rookie running back in Jonathan Brooks. Hopefully he stays healthy. DeAndre Swift is your RB4. I'm perfectly fine with. T. Higgins is your wide receiver 4. I'm perfectly fine with. And then you've got a bunch of young guys at the running back position kind of filling out your bench. I think I'm surprised Brian did not have them higher with the running back to wide receiver ratio. It's not sexy names, but I think it's guys that have upside in Ray Davis, Audric Estime. I'm in on Javonte Williams at cost this year. If he gets cut, then he's got a chance to go somewhere else and be a starter or at least compete. And I think he's talented enough to do so. If he stays in Denver, I still think he should be competing for the starting job there. Ty Chandler is an Aaron Jones injury away from having the running back room in Minnesota, and that's not that unlikely. I think what probably caused other people to rank you a little bit lower is your wide receiver depth being Jonathan Mingo, Odell Beckham Jr., Diggs, and Myers. Diggs, I think, will benefit from a new scenario. Myers is always sneaky. Odell, who knows what you're going to get. And Mingo, I live in South Carolina. The local shows cover the Panthers a lot. I've got hope left for Mingo being only a second-year guy and the way that they've crafted their wide receiver room now to still have the potential that we think he was drafted for last year. So I don't hate that. I do wish you had maybe one more wide receiver that is truly flex-worthy. Myers probably could fit that, but other than Mingo, they're all 27 or older, I think. So someone a little younger would be nice. Your tight ends are solid after Kittle, so you could easily move off of Musgrave or Goddard, or even, hold Sinnott at this point, but you could move Goddard or Musgrave and maybe package him with a running back to try and go get a wide receiver just to shore up that depth. And then you've got most of your draft capital. So,
yeah, that's a great breakdown. I don't really have a whole lot to add to it. You mentioned the elite quarterback room with Stroud and Burrow as the starters. Breece Hall arguably could be the RB1 this year. He was RB2 from week 5 on last year. Christian McCaffrey, of course, was the only one that was better than him over those stretch of weeks. Pacheco, you mentioned him not catching passes, but last year he had, I think, 42 catches. He caught plenty of passes. Yeah, that's pretty solid for a guy that we didn't think could catch passes the year before when we were talking about him. Receiver room is very top heavy. Obviously, you mentioned Lamb, Brown, Metcalf, even Higgins. You got the Higgins Burrow stack. I like that. After that, it's pretty much falls off. Diggs is probably your best flex worthy receiver. But overall, this is a pretty solid roster. Jamie, I wanted to go to you because you also had this team ranked pretty highly. You had them at number 3.
Yeah.
This
team
team
I almost ranked it at 2, but I like the other team a little bit better. This team's almost perfect to me. Perfect starting lineup. You're not going to start Jonathan Brooks. You're going to put Diggs in your lineup right now in redraft. Like, he's someone's wide receiver 2 or 3 even. I saw Swift. Then I wanted to rank it lower because I'm not a Swift guy right now. But then I saw you also had the whole backfield with Roschon and Herbert, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So, that could be your last flex spot. Just throw whoever is starting when Swift's, he's obviously going to get you points whenever he gets hurt. I'm a Roschon guy. Some people are a Herbert guy. I did notice that, Shane mentioned trade Goddard and Javonte Williams for a receiver. Package those two together, see what you can get. And then you go with someone like the upside of Hawkinson, even add something to it. Try to get like a Hawk or even a Pitts, because the guy that has Pitts already has 3 solid
Tight ends, yeah.
Tight ends. So do something like that. I mean, even when Goddard and Kittle get older, you have Musgrave and Sinnott. If you want to keep them, those are going to be your future.
Yeah.
I love this team. It's almost a perfect team, like perfect wide receiver room for me, for your starters. You have like 2 top tier guys. You got 2 top second tier guys with Higgins and Metcalf. I mean, there's not much I would want to do with this team, honestly.
Love it. All right. Let's get to team number 4.
Number 4.
Number 4 team ranked as high as 5, as low as 2. It is Kirk's Chubb. And Brian, this is your squad. But before we get to your breakdown, Brian, there is a question in the chat for you, Shane. And I'm just curious to your thoughts real quick, because you mentioned how much you like Bo Nix. Rookie draft, you going Bo Nix or Drake May?
No, I'm still going Drake May. I know the camp reports haven't been great for May, but I had May as 2. Or pre-draft, I actually had Nix as 3 and then Daniels 4, but those have flip-flopped for me.
Fair enough. All right, so still Drake May. All right, Brian, give us your breakdown of Kirk's Chubb.
Yeah. Well, first of all, as I said before, there's some extra flatness in this league, even more than the other flatness. And looking at some of these rankings, on another day, I might have a few of these top 6 teams in different spots than I do now, and I think that speaks to, that there's a few teams that have a chance to win and maintain sort of some youth and capital at the same time if they make moves right. This is one of them. The other thing I want to say is I don't normally reward puns in fantasy football names, particularly juvenile ones like Chubb and things like that. But I set all that aside for my buddy Kirk's Chubb here and ranked them at number 2, which I guess kind of pulled them up to number 4. So I think they've got good depth at quarterback, but kind of too many, So it's a good problem to have, but that means you now have a trade piece. So the quarterbacks are Jalen Hurts and Kirk Cousins, Bryce Young, Aaron Rodgers, Sam Darnold, and Trey Lance. So Hurts, obviously, one of the top 5 quarterbacks in Dynasty. Cousins, I'm optimistic about him in the Atlanta offense this year. There are some folks who said, well, listen, he's 36 coming back from an Achilles. The team drafted a top 8, number 8 overall pick quarterback underneath him. Beware. I am also optimistic about Bryce in a bounce back year. Nothing elite, but in a bounce back year. But there are some people who, are talking about his limitations and, that there are still some, questions as far as weapons in Carolina, even though they've improved. So what is the ceiling this year? Rodgers, for 1 year might be really good. He's also, 40 and coming off an Achilles. So, you're solid, but there's also some question marks. Darnold is, I think, going to end up the starter for at least a good chunk of the season this year in Minnesota. And I think as that continues to be the news out of Minnesota and out of training camp and stuff, he becomes more tradable. So I would, and Lance, I'm still a believer in that. I think 60% of what's happened to Lance in his career can be blamed on the organization and only 40% on him. But at the same time, we're also not hearing great stuff out of Cowboys camp. So he may have just been ruined by San Francisco, and it's over for him. We'll see. I'd love to be wrong. Anyway, what I'm saying is I would like to see 1 or 2 of those quarterbacks traded for other pieces elsewhere. We've got some solid running backs. Some I don't like. Maybe that's a personal flavor, but a pretty good group overall. And we've got a decent ratio relative to other teams. We've got Kyron and Ramondre and Monty as the top 3. I think Monty's very underrated. A lot of running back usage in Detroit, even though, yes, there is Gibbs. I happen to be on the low end of expectations for Kamara. I think he's pretty much dusty and relying on PPR. But with a lot of the negativity around Kendre Miller, we just kind of have to assume, okay, he's still going to get a good number of touches. Nick Chubb, 29 in December, coming off a second catastrophic knee injury. I don't know when he's going to be ready, and he's not somebody that when I open up Sleeper and say, do I want this orphan, I want to see on that list. And Zach Moss is meh. I think he's kind of a trap this year. Like, there's definitely some good points in his favor, like an overall good offensive environment, and he runs well out of the shotgun, which is what the Bengals and Burrow like to do. But I think Chase Brown has more of the explosive upside, and really Moss turned back into Zach Moss after the first few games of the season last year, and I think people kind of forget that. And then we have two rookies who I really love, and Marshawn Lloyd and Jalen Wright and Shipley, who I'm kind of neutral on relative to the market. There are some people who love him. I think it's both valid to say that Phil Maffa was better last year at Clemson, and that Shipley is athletic enough and can catch passes that if Barkley went down, he would definitely have some run, and may get some pass catching touches, although not enough to have true standalone value. We've got some solid wide receivers, but there's a drop off after the top few. We've got Amon-Ra, who I think we've kind of already seen his ceiling, but he's still top 5-6 wide receiver in Dynasty. I happen to be well above a lot of people on Worthy. I think I already have him at wide receiver 20 overall in Dynasty. I was a big believer pre-draft, pre-4.21 40 at the combine. I think Christian Watson, when all is said and done, has the best shot at being the biggest ceiling in Green Bay. And Christian Kirk and Deontay Johnson are going to get peppered with targets. Hollywood, could go either way, especially depending on what Worthy does. But then we're getting into like Michael Wilson, Sutton, Bateman, Jalen McMillan, who's getting very good buzz. Again, it's solid overall, but I think after the first two, there's a drop off. And then even those first 2 to 4 aren't like the stud 2 to 4 that I want to see when I'm taking over a team, if that makes sense. Hawk is missing the first part of the season. I mean, it could be 6-8 weeks of the season, maybe more. And I would want a better replacement than Taysom Hill. We've got no second and fourth in 2025, although we do have a first and 2/3. So overall, I think when I look at this, I say I have them ranked highly because we've got good pieces and we've got tradable pieces and we've got decent draft capital. So I can make this the team that I want in the sense that I've been talking about, that conveyor belt on these PLPs, where you're good enough to kind of contend for the top 4 spots in the playoffs, but also keep adding youth and picks. I think this might give me the best shot at doing that. So I would move off a couple of those veteran running backs when you think it's appropriate. Guys like Chubb, Kamara, Zach Moss, maybe Monty, and I think shift some of that towards wide receiver in a better wide receiver in your top 3 to 5 that you have there, and add some draft capital and stuff like that. So I think also as I said before, could probably trade a quarterback or two. So some moves to make. And already a good start, which is probably why I like it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was just one spot behind you. I had him ranked at number 3 for a lot of reasons that you just mentioned, how it's a conveyor belt style where you've got guys that are young on the bench that are really to take over some of the guys that are in the starting lineup. Overall, the team is fairly young. I mean, other than maybe Court and Sutton, obviously you mentioned Kirk Cousins a little bit older, but for the most part, this team's pretty young. Kyron Williams, Stevenson, Amon-Ra, obviously Worthy's a rookie. Christian Kirk's been around for a little while, but he's still, in that sort of prime range for wide receivers. So yeah, it's a great team overall. I had them knocked down just a little bit based on some of the draft capital is not quite as good as I would have liked. But overall, solid roster. Jamie, you had this team ranked the lowest, where you and Shane both tied for 5th here. What are your thoughts on this team?
Yeah, I mean, it's a solid fringe playoff team, in my opinion. A lot of targets that I go for in my redrafts right now. Like Deontay's almost on all my teams. Christian Kirk is a target. You got a stud in St. Brown and Hurts. Stevenson, I'm getting super late, and I'm comfortable with him as my RB2. And as much as I hate Kyron, he is going to be solid this year. The only thing that worries me with him is even if he has another top 5 season, I could see his value in Dynasty dropping next season just because it's going to be his last year on his contract. They drafted Corum. He can't stay healthy. I'm just not a big Kyron fan. I probably would have ranked this team a little bit higher if there was another receiver there or running back there besides Kyron Williams.
Yeah, fair points. And you're right about Kyron Williams. His value, we've already seen a decrease in his value just, from taking Blake Corum. And, you've been kind of the front runner as to sort of poo-pooing Kyron Williams and what he's not going to do this year. He is a potential trade candidate. If he starts off the season really well and you can move him at his peak value, because you're right. I mean, situation with his contract's going to come up and Blake Corum is there. So there's a potential that he loses value. So maybe you trade him after a couple weeks of the season and see what you can get for him. But overall, this is a pretty solid roster.
And I did notice Christian Watson on his team. Maybe trade him to that team that has every other Packers receiver. Just
to fill out the whole roster.
Get tight end or something out of them.
All right, let's get to team number 3.
Number 3.
Number 3 team ranked as high as 1 and as low as 4. And Shane, you had them at 1. This is your favorite team, so go ahead and give us your breakdown.
This is my favorite team. Yeah, so let's just start with the quarterback room. I think this is probably the best quarterback room. That may be a little bold. I don't care. Justin Herbert has finished top 5. Jaden Daniels, it could be Anthony Richardson light. Brian, you can correct me on that if I'm wrong later. Trevor Lawrence, I think, has to prove it this year as a Jaguars fan, and I think he's got the best weapons to actually do it this year. Will Levis also has decent weapons this year. That's just your quarterback room. Travis Etienne is one of my favorite players in the NFL. I do think he will, as a fan, I'm hoping that he takes a step back from a usage standpoint, but I'm hoping that maybe increases his efficiency. Josh Jacobs, new scenario. Maybe they'll actually use him correctly in Green Bay. Las Vegas, Oakland, whoever you want to call him, never threw him the ball except for like one season. And he actually had a really good season that year. Your wide receiver room might be a little concerning because I don't know if you have that true number 1 guy, but Olave and Nico both have enough upside, I think, to get there. Brian Thomas Jr., you've got paired with Gabe Davis down below. Again, I always do this. I'm looking at the spreadsheet. So if it's okay, it's actually matches for once in my life. So you have both of those options for Jacksonville, and I like that a lot. I'm actually more keen to Gabe this year because I think he's a better route runner than Brian Thomas right now. Could that change throughout the year? Absolutely. And after a rough first day or week of camp, the offense for the Jaguars in camp has actually started to look better and better and better. So I'm really encouraged by that. Hey, you guys actually have a tight end position. And hey, look, you've got a top 5 dynasty tight end in Mark Andrews. Great job. I'm really proud of you. Terry McLaurin, Xavier Legette, both great options in the flex. And then you've also got Dalton Kincaid, another great dynasty tight end. Your bench has Raheem Mostert, who, while yes, he's old, he's produced. Gus Edwards could be the leader in the backfield in LA, and you have J.K. Dobbins just in case he's not. You also have my other favorite player, in Tank Bigsby, who I'm hoping is part of the reason that Travis Etienne takes a step back in efficiency. Your wide receiver depth is probably concerning. You do have 2 firsts this year and your first in 26. I would try to find another solid wide receiver, I think. I don't know who, and I'm not really sure who I would trade. I maybe try and package some of your running backs in one of those first and see what you can do to go get someone in that Xavier Legette tier, maybe even just somebody that's going to be flexible for you in case Legette has a slow start, in case Brian Thomas and Gabe Davis don't do what I'm hoping they do. But overall, I like this team quite a bit.
Yeah, I had this team at 2 for a lot of the reasons that you just mentioned, and I did kind of mention to myself that the receivers don't have the alpha, right? You mentioned Nico Collins, Chris Olave, Terry McLaurin's there, Brian Thomas Jr. There's no true alpha. Like, I'm going to put this guy in my lineup no matter what.
Yeah.
I think Nico Collins and Chris
I think
Olave both
Nico's
have
probably
that. Yeah, they both have
Yeah.
that chance to be that, but I don't know if they're there yet. Olave has a quarterback issue, and Nico Collins has a competition issue with, obviously Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs being there as well. Quarterback room is solid. Justin Herbert and Trevor Lawrence, I think, are kind of in that same vein where people aren't really sure what to do with them right now in Dynasty because we're not sure what kind of quarterback they are. Are they the ones that we thought they were, or are they the guys that we saw last year? But I think both of them can have bounce back seasons and be good. Jaden Daniels is kind of a wild card where, he could be the best quarterback, at least in fantasy this season as a rookie. So there's a potential there. You mentioned the 2 tight ends. This league actually has a tight end position. Take notes, Godstrike. But so these guys are actually valuable. You got Mark Andrews, and you could flex Dalton Kincaid if need be, who could end up being the leader in targets on that team with the receivers they have currently. So he's listed as a tight end, but could play more like a wide receiver this year. So I had this team ranked number 2, which is right behind where you had them. Brian, let me get your thoughts. You had this team at number 3, so not too far off what we had them. What are your thoughts on this team?
Yeah, like I said, there's some flatness in this area of the league. When it comes to TK Wood, again, I did like the quarterback room overall, but it's one of those things where a lot could go right and a lot could go wrong. Like if, say, for example, Daniels really struggles, and even though they put pieces around Levis, he still kind of Levises. Then you've got some holes there. Nothing too. I mean, you've got good draft capital. We've got solid wide receivers. Although there is, I think, a drop off after Nico and Olave. Got very good tight ends. Kincaid to the moon this year. So maybe would I have them 3? Maybe on a different day I had them 2. But yeah, a solid team would very much like to take over this team as an orphan.
Absolutely. All right, we're up to number 2.
Number 2.
Number 2 team ranked as high as 1 and as low as 4. And Brian, this is your team. It is Ialytics. Give me your breakdown here.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if Ialytics is saying they prefer the eye test to analytics, or if they like to marry the eye test and analytics, or if it's something completely different that I just don't understand. This is a team that has some very good pieces, but like a few of the other teams we've talked about, has some of those aging pieces where I'm starting to say, okay, I want to move off some of that stuff. Overall, we've got some age concerns. Josh Allen, I have him in my top 5 as far as dynasty quarterbacks go. I don't need to talk too much about him, although there is some concern about what sort of some of the new offense is going to look like. I have Richardson. Everybody knows I love him. I have him as my QB3 overall in dynasty. He's going to break fantasy this year, and so I love that. But after that, we've only got Flacco and Ritter, and that is not something that I want to go into the season with. We've got some very good top 2 running backs in Bijan and CMC, 2 of the top 5, I think, consensus dynasty running backs. Pretty good otherwise, with Derrick Henry and Najee and Jerome Ford on board. I love Rasheen Ali. Please hold on to Rasheen Ali. He's about to Wally Pip Keaton Mitchell, and I think surprise a lot of people. I know John Harbaugh is saying, Justice Hill is going to get some, he's the type of guy that you stash because the upside is real big there. Garendo's injured now and out for a few weeks. I already had doubts as to whether he could take over the RB2 spot with Elijah Mitchell. Frank Gore, I think, is a kind of a long shot. Maybe we have a Bills fan here. CEH, again, there's that talk of Tony and Prince. I think it's still probably CEH as the RB2 there, but nothing too impressive. You also now have two of those running backs being pretty old with CMC and Derrick Henry. I know people are like, oh, it's CMC, he's God tier. When you're betting on CMC in 2024, you're betting on a 28-year-old running back, even a very good one and a very good offense, to repeat that same usage, volume, production, and health. That's not a bet I love making, especially at cost. Now, you already have him, so it's not like you're drafting him 101 in best ball, or you're trading for him, or you're taking him where he's overvalued in a startup. But when somebody is overpriced in the market in general across platforms in fantasy football, it might be a guy that I want to move off. So I'm going to want to move off either him or Derrick Henry, and maybe even Najee too. I have Najee below Jaylen Warren. Good running back, nothing solid, not very efficient with his touches. Not a tradable piece, though, to somebody who needs running backs this year. If you are going to trade something, we've got a very good top 5 wide receivers. We've got Chase, Ayuk, Tyreek, Zay Flowers, and then I guess Mike Evans would probably be the 5th there. But again, we have some age at the position with Tyreek, Evans, D-Hop, who is hurt, Thielen, right? And then but behind that, you also only have Shakir, Demario Douglas, and Terrace Marshall Jr., who probably doesn't even belong on a roster. Very good tight ends, Laporta and Kelsey. But again, Kelsey having age, and Kelsey this year, I think, is going to get used. He's going to be preserved for the playoffs again. He was preserved for the playoffs last year, particularly because he got hurt early. But you already hear them talking about that's the intention no matter what this year. And they brought in Hollywood and Worthy. He would be a piece that I would move off of because he's going to be most useful in stuff that doesn't count for fantasy football. And we also now have no first or third in 2025. So, not a bad orphan to take over because I'm like, okay, I've got some tradable pieces. So I would move off those pieces for some younger alternatives and some draft picks, or use them to acquire things like, getting a quarterback 3 or 4, behind those really good top 2. Like we've said, the last few teams, solid with some flaws, something I would take over and be encouraged to make some moves. Let me trade that Najee. Let me trade that Henry. Let me see what I can do to get a quarterback behind the top 2. So, yeah.
Yeah, this team is really solid, especially it's a little top heavy for the way I build my rosters. When you look at those top 5 guys there on the starters list, Josh Allen, Christian McCaffrey, Bijan Robinson, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, right? Any one of those guys could finish as the number 1, at their position overall. A couple of them already have done that in their careers and can very easily do it again this year. Laporta was the number 1 tight end last year, and the guy that was number 2 is Travis Kelce, who he also has on his team. So super solid roster. I just think it's a little too top heavy for my taste. Obviously a contender with this roster when you've got that many top tier guys, so many top 5 guys in Dynasty, that this is definitely a contending team. But as you mentioned, there are some pieces that I might try to move. Derrick Henry would be the one that would sort of be my first attempt to try to move. His value is super high right now with going to the Ravens. And not that I think Derrick Henry is going to be bad with the Ravens, but I don't know how much longevity he's going to have there with the Ravens. It might be a year or 2. So I would try to move him while his value is super high right now. So that's kind of how I view this team. Shane, give me your thoughts real quick. You had this team at number 4, so a little bit lower than Brian did. What are your thoughts here on this team?
Yeah, I think when I look at it, it's the quarterback room, like Brian mentioned. You've got QB1, QB2, and Josh Allen, and then Anthony Richardson. I am super high on him this year as well, Brian. If he stays healthy, he could easily finish his QB1 overall, in my opinion. but then you don't have anything else. You've got his backup in Joe Flacco, but that's not going to be the same level of production. Your wide receivers are, I think, pretty sexy, if you ask me, with Chase Hill and Ayuk, and that's whether Ayuk's in San Francisco or not. Zay Flowers is nice. Mike Evans is Mr. 1,000 yards, and then you've got good running backs in Bijan, McCaffrey, and Derrick Henry. I think Brian mentioned this with it being dynasty. I would probably try and trade one of them because they're getting a little long in the tooth, especially for running back. And you do have Najee sitting on your bench. I like Najee. Like I feel like I'm one of the 3 people that do. But if you can trade him and get a little younger with Derrick Henry and McCaffrey, I would do that. And then DeAndre Hopkins is a solid veteran, but he'd also be someone that I'm willing to trade. I like that you've got Khalil Shakir and Demario Douglas a lot. I think that Patriots wide receiver room is pretty open, and Shakir, and so is the Bills. So I like having both of those for the upside.
Yeah, I like that. Jerome Ford, just to mention, he's there on the bench too as another running back that you have, and maybe he's somebody that I try to trade to the Nick Chubb owner, as an insurance policy, because I don't know if Nick Chubb is fully healthy. I don't think Jerome Ford has any value, and then if Jerome Ford starts the season as the starter, I don't know how long his value is going to stay up there with the threat that Nick Chubb eventually comes back. So I think now is the time to move him if you want to reach out to the Nick Chubb owner and see if he wants to buy Jerome Ford as an insurance policy, see what you can get. Maybe you get some draft capital in that sense. But that's the only thing I think I would be looking to do besides moving Derrick Henry right now. So, all right, the moment we all been waiting for. Number 1 team.
Number one.
Number 1 team ranked as high as number 1, as low as number 3, and it is Team Meadowlands. And Jamie, this is your squad. Give us your breakdown.
Yeah, between the 1 and 2 team, I mean, it's like picking Bijan or Brees. I love them both. So I ended up going with this team as my number 2. I actually preferred the team you just talked about over this team. But it's a solid team, man. You have 2 top 8 quarterbacks, Mahomes and Caleb. Like, I have Caleb as my number 8 in Dynasty right now. I think he's going to be solid for years, so it's pretty safe room. You have 4 top 12 receivers, right? I mean, I have Neighbors probably higher than others. He's at 9 for me. I don't know where you guys have him. But with London, Garrett Wilson, Justin Jefferson, those are elite players. And then you have DJ Moore, who I think I have him at 15, around that area. I mean, he just got his contract. He's going to be with Caleb for the next 4 years. I love that team, man. And let's see, even Addison, I'm not a big fan of Addison. I have him outside of top 24, but I've seen him as high as 18 in some people's rankings. And he's your 5th receiver. That's amazing. So if you keep this team the way it is, I don't really see much trading that you could do to improve it. Worried about the running back room, but that's how I build teams. I love having these top receivers and then just worrying about my running backs later. But Kenneth Walker, he's going to get you points. Corum, you know how I feel about Kyron. Corum, if Kyron goes down this year, you have to put Corum as like a top 10 running back in that offense. He should be the 101, honestly. If people are thinking Kyron's going to be a top 5 in that offense with 80%, like, give Corum 80%. He'll be top 3. But I'm higher on Corum than a lot. So you do need a little bit of depth behind the receiver or the quarterback, but you have a bunch of seconds and a first that you could possibly move up to get a back next year, or even trade for Bryce Young, like we talked about earlier a little bit, or even that the worst team has Watson. Go get a Watson just as your number 3. But even if, like, I won a team last year with Pierre Strong as my starting running back. So that's why I'm not too worried about you having Kenneth Walker and Blake Corum, because your receivers are so solid that they're going to put up points week after week. That I think you could be a little weak on the running back side. Tight end, I like Firemouth. He's one of the guys that if I miss out on the top 8 in redraft, like I'll wait and just take Firemouth. I would like to see someone else, like maybe an Otten at your backup, or go get Hunter Henry, because I'm not a big fan, and Theo Johnson, I think it's going to take some time. I do love my athletic tight ends, but you got Bellinger to compete with, so Theo is probably going to be useless this year, to be honest. And yeah, I mean, this team, or the team we just talked about, is definitely winning the championship. I just think you need a little bit help, like a backup quarterback, just in case. Because even if, let's say, Mahomes gets hurt or Caleb gets hurt, you don't have not even depth to be able to like fill that spot. So I'm banking on this team starters to stay healthy, and that's what I love about this team.
Yeah, I think it was mentioned in the chat about the depth at tight end. You're right. There's very little depth at tight end. You got Pat Fryermuth and then some guys that you would not feel comfortable starting behind him.
There are 2 tight ends on your waiver wire that I didn't see on someone's team that you could pick up. Jelani Woods is a good dart throw, and Dulcich.
Yeah, both of those could be viable tight ends just to have on your bench for sure. And you mentioned the running back situation, and I think this is why I was between this team and another team. I ranked this team at number 1 based on the draft capital, right? They do have their first round pick next year, and I think a team that's like this with this starting roster obviously is in the competitor stage. So if they're, if it's week 7, week 8, week 9, and they're looking at their team like, okay, I only have 2 losses. I'm a competitor. They could move that first round pick to get a running back for that stretch run. I don't know which running back it would be, but having that first round pick in your pocket allows you to do that if you decide to go all in. All in is probably not the right word, because I don't think you necessarily be going all in, pushing your chips to the middle, but you could upgrade your running back room pretty easily with that first round pick. With Kenneth Walker being your RB1, go out and get another guy to take the spot of Blake Corum there for your RB2 and try to ride them to a championship. But solid roster overall. You mentioned, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Jefferson, Garrett Wilson, Malik Neighbors, Drake London, DJ Moore, all guys that are within the top 12 of their position, all on the starting roster. It's pretty solid.
And the way I like is you have young receivers, all studs, and those you have 3 second round picks next year. I think one of them is going to be a high, and 2 girls, 1 chub. You just hammer out running backs with those second round picks, because it's going to be a deeper class next year at running back, and that's what this team needs. Like I said, last year I won a championship with a solid receiver core and quarterback, and my starter running back was Justice Hill and Pierre Strong. And then when I think I had JT also when he came back, he also helped me. But you can do it with just 1 running back and put a filler in, and you have Corum. I think Corum is a great filler for this team.
Agreed. Real quick, Shane, anything you wanted to add to this team? You had them ranked the lowest of the 4 of us.
Yeah, it was probably the quarterback room. I mean, not having a true QB3 is what really did it for me. You do have Rice and McConkey, Pearsall, and Dotson, and Mims, if you want to throw him in there too, all on your bench. That gives you a lot of upside. But when are they really ever going to crack your starting lineup other than bye weeks? I don't know, because your wide receivers are pretty solid. I'm not as high on Blake Corum, hence my salute to Jamie earlier in the show. And with that being said, there is a big concern for RB2 for me here. So that's probably why I had them ranked the lowest.
Fair enough. Brian, you had them at 1 like I did. What are your quick thoughts on this team? Anything we didn't already talk about?
No, I think y'all covered it all. I mean, yeah. Just by the way, in my initial notes that I write in pen before I do the doc for the teams that I'm assigned, I put VG wide receivers exclamation point. Love that.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, this is a solid. This is definitely the best receiver room in this league by far, top to bottom. All right. Well, that wraps up the podcast, gentlemen. I want to thank the three of you for coming on. I want to thank everybody that's in the chat. You know, NBA Rigged is in there. Godstrike, Kyle made an appearance in there. Appreciate the league showing up. I think a couple of the other guys showed up earlier in the show as well. Appreciate y'all coming out, showing your support. Jamie, your first PLP, you did a great job, man. Really appreciate you coming on as well. Hopefully we can get you on some more of these. Unfortunately, for this 2024 season, the PLPs have sold out. I guess that's fortunately in a way that we sold them out. But unfortunately, if you wanted to get one done this year. But currently right now we're running a promo. If you go to goingfor2.com/PLP and use promo code 25 for 25, and you can save 25% off of a PLP for next season. We actually start doing them as early as January. So if you want a Dynasty League review in January, you can go ahead and purchase those. Or if you wanted to go ahead and book it for your redraft league. I know these gentlemen here that just booked this show actually booked it about this time last year for this month in July. So they booked actually 3 of them in July last year at this time. So go do that at goingfor2.com/PLP. Right now, we'll go around the room, gentlemen. Give us your Twitter handle or anything you wanted to plug. We'll start with you, Shane.
Of course you will. Yeah, just follow me on Twitter at FFShaneB. Poly's playoff kicks off tomorrow, so that's been my main focus. But one thing that was not mentioned in my bio earlier is I am also an Auburn football writer for FF League Winners, and my offensive preview of their team should be coming out sometime in the next week.
Good stuff. And Jamie?
Yeah, Twitter, Jamie Perogue. I'm more on Facebook, though, in my Facebook groups, fantasy football discussion. I'm looking forward to the expo next weekend. I don't know if you all are going, but I'll be there for my first one.
Nice.
So I hope to see you guys there.
Good stuff. Brian?
Yeah, FF Junkie _ on the Twitter machines. Rankings on goingfor2.com. Gonna try to have an article out about redraft sleepers based on Dynasty experience. Dynasty Fever podcast. We just reunited after a month break and put out our latest episode, and that's at Dynasty Fever Pod on Twitter. And yeah, I guess that's about it. Yeah.
Good stuff. Good stuff. As always, follow me on Twitter at JeffLambert77. We're going to be taking a hiatus from our show this Wednesday, but the Armchair Fantasy Show will be back on Wednesday the 14th. Getting a little bit break before the season starts, and then we rolling right into our redraft content and everything, so you can be on the lookout for that. For everybody in the chat, for the gentleman here, appreciate the purchase, Godstrike, for the PLP. Hopefully we see y'all again next year, and guys, have a good night.